Thank you, Corny. So I see there's a camera there. If you could just zoom that in on him. Sounds like he's worried about falling asleep, and if he does, I would like to have video of it. So, all right. How was lunch? Wasn't it amazing? Well done, kitchen crew. Amazing. So that little bit of clapping isn't going to work it down. So are we okay with playing a little game? I'll take that as a yes. So I noticed a phenomenon in the parking lot. You folks like your big vehicles. My goodness. I saw this little lady yesterday. There's this school bus, basically. I think it's called a Suburban, but we call them school buses back home, you know. And she's this little old lady in there, or old, I don't know, this little lady in there and just driving. I'm like, wow. So I need some of you non-massive vehicle peoples to stand proud. If you drive something smaller, would you stand up? Okay, there's more of you than I thought. Some of you are insecure, but stay standing, because you got a job to do, okay? I want you now to go find like 5 people and say, hey, I use way less fuel than you. So go, find a few people. Tell them I use way less fuel than you. All right. Have a seat. Now all the rest of you stand up. You gas guzzlers. Yeah. Okay, stay standing. I want you to walk around some of these people who are still seated. See, now they're all standing back up. And say, I could drive all over you. Yeah. Go find them. Go find them. You got to move about. You got to move a little bit. All right. Now, do you have any of those things left, Maria? Oh, okay. All right. I was going to have a prize for somebody, but they're gone now. But is there one single person in this church that drives a minivan? One guy. Stand up, stand up. Woo! All right. So I wish I had some Canadian candy to give you, but we're so proud of, yeah, okay, there you go. We are so proud of you. That's our vehicle. That speaks our heart, okay? Women, he is ready for children. It's marriage first, but you know, just saying. But hey, it's been an honor to be here with you, and I can't say enough how it takes trust to invite someone in and say, would you come and speak to us on something? And so thank you for this privilege. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for being here. What I want to do this afternoon is talk about something that I think can be seen as a little bit touchy. And so, but I think it's also something that we can't avoid. And so this session maybe will be a little bit more teaching, because I think the rest of it, I'm hoping at the end of this you will also be inspired a little bit. But this one I want to do a little bit more, maybe a little bit teaching, and so I might get stuck behind my notes a bit more because I want to say certain things the way God led me to write it down, and so I want to get it the way it was said. But in this time that we've had together, we've talked about just this idea of serving. And we talked about having a servant heart, and we talked at first about, making sure our sin is properly dealt with, and that we need to confess sin, and that if we said that if we have hidden sin, it's going to derail where we need to go. And then Saturday night, we talked about the heart of a servant. This morning, we talked about the goal of serving. I don't think that that's really something that was maybe all that new to you, but I'm hoping that as you listen to it, I know for myself, I've sat through a lot of sermons and professors, and sometimes when someone says something, it's like, okay, maybe that's just the way I need to word it, in order for it to make a little bit more sense to me. You do with it whatever you want, but, so this morning we talked about the goal of serving, that the goal of serving is to honor God or to honor Jesus, to bring glory to Him. And so therefore, no matter how difficult the serving can be, you can always have a win. You can, that doesn't mean that you don't want it to work well and you don't want things to go well, but at the end of the day, you can say, okay, nothing happened. And we were talking to some people today about how VBS sometimes can derail you, and it just can be difficult. And they were sharing about a place where they had done VBS or DVBS, and they had some difficult people there, and it made it very complicated. And I know at our church, sometimes when you have a few hundred kids there, the leaders are crying, and so then at the end we have to ask ourselves again, why did we do this? Well, we wanted to, help the kids. We wanted to see them come to know Christ. We wanted, okay, all of those, yes, yes, yes. And some of those things we may have no control over. Because if a kid comes to know the Lord or not, we don't control that. If a kid behaves, we can't necessarily control that. That's the parents' jobs. But anyway, and some of those kind of things, we don't have control over that. But the one thing we have a capability of doing, and that is doing it for His honor. And so sometimes when we forget that, we actually remove the one thing we can control. And that's a hard issue, and that's an important one. What I want to talk about this afternoon is this concept of embracing the tension. And I'll give you a little bit of history where we were at this with our church. And I know that our demographic is quite different. And so our church is located in little old Leamington, Ontario. We are one of the, per capita of Canada, we are one of the most diverse communities. We have, we have Lebanese, Italians, Portuguese, Mexicans, Hondurans, Jamaicans, a number of refugees now from like Syria and Somalia, and you name it. We pretty much have East Indians, and you pretty much, you name it, we have it in Leamington. And I haven't noticed as much of that here in Kansas, which is fine. We live where we live, you live where you live. And so one of the things that, like I said this morning, one of the things we had to wrestle with in our church is racism. Before we were going to really become a church that was open to everyone, and before we were going to be a church that really was going to go and connect and serve, we had to deal with some issues in our heart, and we actually had to address some individuals in our church who would make very racist statements sometimes in the foyer when they were talking about a certain group of people. And we just said, this has got to stop, and if you're not willing to stop, you should consider going somewhere else, because we cannot be a church that has that kind of behavior, because that will always interfere with our mindset then. And so those are some of the things. And so when we started talking about embracing the tension in our church, one of the very first things we recognized that we were going to end up in a place where we may have to deal with people that we're not comfortable dealing with. We may have to interact with people that we would not in a normal time or in our normal part of our lives interact with. And we may end up having to work with people in certain things, and whatever the circumstance, we just had to wrestle with the fact there's going to be tension. If we want to be a church that reaches people who do not know Jesus, we need to be willing to deal with the mess, deal with the fallout, deal with the controversies, deal with all those kind of things, and we will. So we made a decision to do that, and that was a complicated thing, and it was an important thing. So this afternoon, what I want to do is I want to talk to us about wrestling with the tension that comes with serving. And here I'm thinking maybe a little bit more outside of this church community, because within the church community there's still going to be some tension, there's still going to be some differences and stuff like that. But often when this is seen the most is when it is outside of the church. And so I talked to Pastor Gerhard about this on Friday. Maria and I, did, and just to kind of see, like, what is some of the stuff going on here. So here's what I need to just acknowledge. I don't understand your community very well. So I don't understand it very well. I want to be very respectful to your community. He understands, and we talked about some of the differences. We talked about some of the things that are going on here. And so I'm coming in somewhat blind. And you need to just forgive me if all of a sudden if I assume something, or if I, whatever, I'm just publicly declaring my ignorance to some degree, but you can wrestle through what this looks like by yourself later on as a congregation. So this afternoon, we want to wrestle with some of the tensions that will come up. What do we do, when we consider or focus on serving others, especially those in the community who, do not see things quite the way we see them? Each of our churches are located in a community that has lots of needs. Each of our churches is located in a place where there's a lot of needs, and we can easily overlook these needs if we are thinking that it's going to look exactly the way maybe we think it should look. If I think that a need only looks this way, but I overlook the fact that someone else is experiencing a need that looks very differently, suddenly, if I'm not willing to deal with the tension that comes with that, if I'm not willing to get into the mess of those kind of situations, suddenly I've narrowed down to the small little marginal group of people whom I'm willing to actually serve, whom I'm actually willing to engage with, because I'm not willing to not willing to wrestle with some of the tension that comes with working with different needs and different people that are in our community. So at the same time, we live in a great community with a lot of amazing people. And I'm sure that in Sublette here, you have a lot of amazing people. You don't have just needs. So we recognize that there's this tension, sometimes between, we have these people who have great needs, but at the same time, we have these amazing people. And I remember when I did youth ministry, one of the things that I had to work with myself was not to show favoritism. Because these kids on this side, the ones that were fun to be with, the parents who actually supported their youth pastor, those people who actually said thank you, and they didn't just say, here, have my kid for 3 hours, and we don't know what to do with them, so good luck, and then later on they'd get mad at you because apparently their little precious child didn't get everything they wanted, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I'm sure that's just Leamington, not you guys. I love dealing with the good people. And it was tempting to show favoritism here. It was tempting to serve, to give all my time and energy. But then these people over here, the family that was all dysfunctional, the kid who didn't, come half the time, the person who half the time you're like, what are you even wearing? You can't really wear that, or did you do this before you came? Like all these crazy things, and it was tense and it was awkward, and you would go to their house and you weren't sure if you were going to get shot or, injected by something, because it was awful, and so it was easy to want to focus just on here. And I would be a fool to think that you don't have that in this church, where there's a temptation to show favoritism. Every single one of us, when we serve, we are going to that's the first tension you will face, is the temptation to show favoritism. Not that you necessarily like these people better, but man, it's just easier. It's just easier. They say thank you. They listen to you. They, whatever it might be. But over here, and so that's the first tension you're going to, and so in Leamington, we have these people, good people. These are easy to work with people. And then we have these people. They're not as healthy. We kind of have to do the same thing over and over and over. And my guess is that here in Sublette, you have some of that same, demographic, some of that same stuff going on. And so that's the first thing that we're going to have to wrestle with is, how do we deal with these tensions? What do we do with them? Because every single one of us is going to have them in some way. We cannot only focus on the needs that are inside the church, though. We cannot only focus on the needs that are inside the church. We as followers of Jesus must do for others what we are willing to do for Jesus. We must be willing to go outside of our church and do for others what we are willing to do for one another and what we are willing to do for Jesus. It was Jesus who said that what we do for the least of these, or what we don't do for the least of these, we have either done or not done for him or to him. So we recognize that sometimes these difficult people on this side and the ones that are unhealthy and the ones that take up a lot more energy, Jesus still loves these people just as much as he loves these people. And so again, this is a tension. So sometimes when you're at meetings, you're like, okay, so what direction do we want to go with this program? What direction do we want this ministry to have? The temptation will be, well, what's going to be the easiest? What will get the most people? What's going to cost the less? The least amount? What's going to have the biggest results as far as who knows what our goal is? But I'm challenging you as a church, and I'm challenging you as individuals, something to say, well, what if we just go difficult? What if we recognize that we have and again, this is Leamington. We have a mental health issue. We have a drug issue. We have a young teenage girl's pregnancy issue. We have a language barrier issue with a lot of migrants that have moved into our community. We have this, we have that. One of the things that we discovered again in Leamington is maybe different is some of these migrant workers were so extremely lonely. They come down for like 10 months at a time and they're lonely and so just, and again, I think for us as a church, we're not doing very well with that. We don't really know what to do. So the temptation then is not to really do anything, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And so I want to challenge you as a church, these tensions exist. And when you hear about these tensions and when you bump into these tensions, I'm hoping that you're going to be willing to say, this is what serving is all about. Now we finally got, because if it's easy, it's not really serving. It's a hobby. It's fun. It feels good. Good. Do those things. I'm watching you guys have lunch here. I trust this is something you do regularly, and I sense you do because you knew exactly, everybody ran. They knew where to go. So I have a feeling you've done this before. Keep doing, I'm not for 1 second saying don't do this, but your kitchen crew can cook. Yeah, Mom. I'm assuming that was a son. So then, I'm sticking my nose in somewhere. So what could you do with that? Now, for you guys driving 15 hours, that's like 2 minutes for us, apparently. Are there needs within an hour, 2 hours of here that you're like, we can buy some stuff that will keep this food warm? And I'm just throwing some thoughts out. Because what you're doing here is so good. Don't keep it here. Don't just keep it here. I'm just talking about the food. You got to figure this out. My job is to stir the pot a little bit. I'm telling you what you've got here, church, is good. It's beautiful. It's healthy. Do not keep it just here. Because there is a community, whether it's here, Garden City, Liberal, I don't know the places, they need that. They need to experience the love that you are showing one another right here in this church, and it is a beautiful thing. So when we look at the life of Jesus, what we see over and over is he had compassion for those in need. And I'm going to throw this out there. If you do not know the needs in your community, meet with your mayor, meet with your police officer, and meet with the principals of the school. Those are probably the key people that will tell you like that. Meet with a doctor, meet with a health, ER person or someone in a crisis situation like that. They can tell you the needs. We brought in 3 people in our church. We brought them in on Sunday morning. I told our church right off the bat, this is not going to be a spiritual service. We're bringing, we brought in a high school teacher. We brought in, a principal. We brought in a social worker, and I forget one other person that works with homelessness. And we brought them in, and all I said to them is, I want you to tell our church about the needs that are in Leamington. And when I talked to them, I said, I want you to break this church heart for Leamington. And they did. There were people sitting there going, I did not know this was in our town. And it changed our heart because all of a sudden we're meeting with people and we're hearing from people who are on the very front line saying, here are some of the tragedies, here are some of the hardships, here are some of the things that are going on. When Jesus went into towns, he went where the need was. And that's what the church has been called to do. And trust me, when you do that, you will encounter some tension. Compassion moved Jesus to heal. Compassion moved Jesus to touch. Read the Gospels. Look at how many times Jesus touched people. He didn't need to. Some of the touching was actually countercultural. He touched people because very often lepers and people like that, when was the last time they were touched? Jesus touched them. Compassion moved Jesus to interact with those who were often seen as outcast in their day. As a follower of Jesus, we must be willing to do the same. But this compassion also brought Jesus into some sticky situations. So in John chapter 8, you can start turning there. The passage we want to look at this afternoon, what we're going to see is Jesus is invited into a very sticky situation. Now, some translations, just so you know, don't have this in there, so we're not going to take time to debate that today. But John chapter 8, verses 2, here is what it says. John chapter 8, verses 2. At dawn, he appeared again in the temple court, where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group. They shamed her, basically is what that says. They shamed her. Now, how many, I won't need to ask this, but I'm sure most of us have heard this story before. And what I want to do today is I want to take some time. I want to pull this story apart a little bit and put it back together and pull it apart and put it together, because I think that there are some things in this story that we have overlooked and we can learn from. I think the tension, most of us would say, in this story is the woman standing before, that Jesus is being questioned. And we're going to see in a little bit, that's not the tension at all. Jesus handles that like it's nothing. Look at what they did here. They found this woman caught in adultery, and they make her come and stand before the entire group. Now, very early on, we already get a sense of some of the tension that's going to happen here. I don't know if you've ever, been brought into a situation where someone was trying to trap you, but when they do it, it can be a little awkward when someone asks you questions, and sometimes it's around politics, and sometimes it's around abortion, and sometimes it's around, different, gender and stuff like that. And when people want to ask you questions, they kind of want to trap you and say, what do you think about those things? And that's what they're doing here to Jesus. Their goal is to try to trap him. But very early on, we sense this tension, and this woman is, brought in, forced to stand before this whole group of people, which would have been basically all men. And so one of the things that we see right away is that women at that time were very restricted. Sadly, they were often treated very unfairly, and their testimony had very little weight. So in other words, by making her come and stand before the men, they're already basically saying, we're not going to listen to anything you say because your testimony isn't valid. We've already determined what you're guilty of, and now we're just going to ask Jesus what he thinks we should do with you. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees were responsible for dealing with such serious breaches of the law. And so they were not there to exercise compassion, but they were there to fulfill the duties of the law, the letter of the law. Now, there's something suspicious immediately about this whole situation. Now, I don't know about you. I don't know how much you know about affairs, but here's one little thing you should know about that, is that it takes two people. Have you ever thought of that? Where's the man? Maybe he was just much more agile and got out of there way quicker than she did. But where's the guy? Why is he not also brought in to stand before the group? So you see right away, there's something suspicious. There's maybe more going on here than just this woman's sin. What's going on? What is these people's intentions? Adultery is, like I said, not something that one person commits in solitude. It requires two people. So if they were caught red-handed, then how was it that the other person was able to escape? How was it that the male was able to get away? What was the reasoning for this? Was he more agile? What happened? Was there even an attempt to catch him? Or why were they only bringing this woman before Jesus? Now, the impression that we get here is that the accusers were much more concerned about, were not all that concerned about justice, as they were simply trying to provide an environment or a situation to embarrass Jesus. Really, what you begin to see very quickly is that they're not that concerned about this woman's sin. What they want to do is, if they, in their mind, they now found the perfect scenario, they found the perfect environment with which to embarrass Jesus. And you're going to see why I say that in a little bit. Let's read verse 4. And so they said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman is caught in adultery. In the law of Moses commands us to stone such a woman. Now what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. Now, the law of Moses is very, very clear. There's really no gray area whatsoever. And so they saw this as the perfect opportunity to see whether or not Jesus would rule against the law of Moses. And it's safe to say that they possibly assumed that he would, because they were already bringing things to him like, "Hey, how come your disciples are picking wheat on the Sabbath and you're not freaking out?" And Jesus would kind of, go, and just say, well, this, and this. And not that he dismissed the law of Moses, but I think that by now they kind of figured out Jesus wasn't as concerned about some of those laws. And that's a whole nother conversation. But so I think in their minds, they have already maybe decided that Jesus is probably going to go against this law as well. And so if they can prove now in front of everyone that Jesus doesn't care about the law, that Jesus is going to just dismiss the law of Moses and allow this woman who was caught in adultery to walk away free, well, guess what? Jesus' popularity is going to take a massive hit. So I think their goal is to embarrass Jesus and to show everybody, look at this guy. He doesn't even hold to the law of Moses in something as serious as adultery. And so Jesus just bends down and starts writing on the ground. And the question is asked is to create a dilemma for Jesus. If he answers one way, his popularity takes a hit. But here's what we don't understand. If he answers the other way, and he says, well, yeah, the woman should be killed, she should be stoned, then they can now go to the Romans. Because guess what? Only the Romans can charge somebody with the death penalty. So then what they would do is they would go to the Romans and they would have him charged with sedition before the Roman governor, saying, this man is going around saying people should be killed, and they're hoping the Romans will then kill him. So in their minds, they've come up with the perfect plan. If he goes against the law of Moses, they can say, see, this guy doesn't believe the law of Moses. And so people, are you noticing? You're listening to a teacher who doesn't even follow the law of Moses. If he says, yes, kill the man, then they're going to run over to the Romans and say, hey, we have a dangerous man over here. He's going around telling people they should kill people. And I think in their minds, they have created the perfect dilemma for Jesus. What is he going? And sometimes when we look at that, we would look at it and say, he's trapped. There's no right answer. What's he going to do? Well, Jesus is just writing on the ground. They try to trap Jesus with this very carefully calculated question. I don't know if you've ever been in a place where you felt trapped like that, but it's difficult. And I remember once I was speaking at a youth retreat in Ontario, and they had this Q&A afterwards, which was fun but awkward. And so all of a sudden one of these kids, and there's kids there from like 8 different churches, a large group of kids. And so one of these kids went behind the mic and he's like, not Mike, sorry, he just asked. He said, what church should we go to? Now, I have no idea if he was trying to trap me. I kind of know him a little bit. I think he was. And it was like, oh, I see what you're doing here. Word of advice, just don't say anything. That's a great question. I'm sure your pastor can help you with that and move on, And he's like, oh, me? Sat down. Well, that's what they're trying to do here with Jesus. They're trying to trap him. And so look at what happens next verse 7. When they kept on questioning him, they're like a bunch of little kids, like, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Well, they kept on questioning him. He straightened up and said to them, let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her. And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. And just like that, Jesus turns the tables on them. Now, I know you are all red-blooded Americans. I know you, and we love this, don't we? Like, he went from being the hunted to the hunter. Ugh, okay, that's maybe overstating it a little bit, but, we love this because just like that, he goes from, being the one who's being accused and being, trapped, and now he's completely turned it on them, and all of a sudden, they're the ones having to go, oh, well, what are we going to do? We Christians love this because we love winning debates. I don't think that's what Jesus was planning on doing. Here's what I want you to, I'm going to jump to this a little bit early because I don't want you to miss this. You got to understand something that Jesus saw in this tension that most people never saw. He saw the woman. Most people just see the tension. They see if he does this, this happens. If he does this, this happens. Jesus never lost sight of the woman, a human being whose life was in jeopardy, whose heart was possibly, who knows what brought her to do what she did. Jesus never lost sight of her. I want to challenge you, when you face those tensions, never lose sight of your objective. People. The serving people. Jesus turns the tables on them, but I don't think that was his intention. You may recall his words that if someone looks at a woman lustfully, he has committed adultery with her in his heart. But I think it goes even beyond this. Obviously, Jesus is not condoning her behavior. The law dealt with women much harsher than it did with men in regards to adultery, and Jesus knew this. When a man was caught, he would still maintain his respectability in public service. When a man was caught in adultery, it didn't mess up his whole life. When a woman was caught in adultery, she basically was an outcast from there on. So Jesus' ruling, therefore, came as a challenge to the consciousness of the men who heard him. He recognizes that this is all men who are making these accusations, and he's possibly looking at them going, I know how many of you have done who knows what. You were able to go on with your life, but this woman will not. But if you have never done what she's done, if you've never committed a sin, throw a stone. The embarrassment was no longer on him, but on them. His ruling about adultery amounts to redressing of the unfavorable balance in favor of the underprivileged sex. In other words, the way Jesus handles this is suddenly her being a woman is no longer seen as a weakness. Because the issue is no longer gender. The issue is no longer just the one thing, the thing that she did. The issue now is the sin within the hearts of every single human being. So by appealing to the consciousness, he raises the issue of a moral level before where it belongs. Jesus will not allow them to accuse her just because she's a female. So Jesus completely turns the tables on them. This is in line with Jesus' attitude throughout his teaching. And in verse 9, at this, those who heard began to go away one at a time. The older ones first, until only Jesus was left. With the woman still standing there, Jesus straightened up and asked her, Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? Here we see the compassion of Jesus on full display. Had he only been concerned about winning the debate, I don't want you to miss this, okay? Had Jesus only been worried about winning the debate of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law? Think about it. Had he only wanted to get himself out of that trap, he would have walked away and never addressed the woman. You ever thought of that? If the only thing he wanted to do was get out of that tension, he would have seen everyone walk away and he would have walked away himself because he didn't need to address her. He hadn't made any accusations towards her. He hadn't asked her to be there. He could have nodded at her and just walked on, but he didn't. We are forced to wrestle with, why does Jesus address this woman? This is where the real tension of the story happens. Not when the teachers are trying to accuse him. That was something, Jesus just handles that. He just, without any question, he handles that. Here is where the real tension of the story lies. We may think that the tension, was entrapping him, but this is where Jesus truly has to deal with the tension of this woman and of sin and what he is now going to do. By addressing the woman, he now has to decide, what do I do with her? He was the only one without sin. And so by addressing her, suddenly Jesus is now left to deal with the mess. Jesus has now walked himself right into the situation where before he wasn't the one making accusations. He wasn't saying anything. But now by addressing the woman, he's now left to go, okay, so what do I do with you now? Jesus continues in this very moment to exercise compassion towards this woman and refuses to be cornered. And now he refuses to take the easy way out. He refuses to take the easy way out. And these are the things I love about Jesus. He is just not afraid of your mess. He is not going to he didn't die on the cross and give some quick solution to sin and now you figure it out. He sent the Holy Spirit. So that if you are right now wrestling with some of your own sin, guess what? Jesus, through the Holy Spirit, is willing to get into the messiness of your life, not just so that you can remove some tension, but so that you can have complete and total forgiveness. Jesus doesn't take the easy way out of the situation. Verse 11, no, sir, no one, sir, she said. Then neither do I condemn you, Jesus declared. Go now and leave your life of sin. The interesting here is that Jesus knew that the accusers were telling the truth. She had committed adultery. She was guilty of the very thing they accused her of. She hadn't been wrongfully accused. We know this because Jesus tells her that she should, that he would not condemn her. In other words, he's looking at her going, I know what you did. I have the power. I have the authority. I'm the only one who can pick up a rock and throw it at you. I know what you did is what you did. But instead of condemning her, and he tells her to leave her life of sin, he doesn't dismiss her sin. He doesn't compromise or condone her lifestyle. That, folks, is the power of compassion. Over the last few days, we've looked at this topic of serve. And we've looked at what this means for us. And I'm telling you right now, you may never find yourself in a situation exactly what Jesus had here. But you are going to find yourself again and again in places where you are going to have to wrestle with the tension that comes with serving. The verse that we used at the camp, and I want to use here again, is Galatians chapter 5, verse 13. It says, you, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free. But do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another in humility, humbly in love. So I want us to wrestle now with embracing this tension. How do we use our freedom to serve in messy situations? At the forefront, I will say that unless we have compassion for people, we will not need to even bother with embracing the tension. Unless we have compassion for people, don't even bother trying to embrace the tension. We will just simply want to walk away from those situations because we will be more concerned about our own image, about what it may do to us, about how difficult it is. We may have prejudice and stereotypes about certain people, and because they're involved in that kind of sin, and I would have nothing to do ever with that kind of sin, so that's disgusting, and I'm at least not involved in something that disgusting. When we have no compassion, it will limit where we are willing to serve, because we will see many, many people as something that we wouldn't even want to get involved in. And here's the interesting thing, is that most of us here, probably all of us here, we love missionary stories. We love to hear how missionaries go into places where no one has ever been, and we probably, and I'm sure you as a church, you support missionaries in different fields, and you love to hear those stories when they come back and they share about how they maybe even went into an unreached people group, and they're among these people who do things that are so against Christ and so awful, and we love to hear how people are willing to go into those areas and reach these people for Jesus. We pray that missionaries would have success and that they would make a difference, but somehow that same passion to see lives change does not translate into our own communities very often. Let me say it in other words. When we hear stories of how unreached people groups who live contrary to the plan of God, the plan that God has for them, and how their hearts were broken and how they turned and their hearts were stirred and they came to know Jesus, we celebrate. We're like so glad missionaries, somebody was willing to go into these broken places among these people who were so far from God. And we're like, oh, we're so glad the gospel went into those areas. Now hear me carefully. So often the church is not willing to do the same thing in their community. People within our communities who are so far from God. And instead of celebrating the idea that we can take the gospel into those messy places, into those difficult places, we've written them off as who cares. Or maybe that's not true here. But I know back home, one of the things that we as a church have had to really wrestle with is, what do we do with people who do not believe what we believe? What do we do with people who have an agenda very different than our agenda? What do we do with people who are actually opposed to Christian values and views? Because if it was on the mission field, we'd be like, we got to reach those people. We got to reach those people. But sometimes within our own communities, we have a very, very different attitude towards them. So let's focus in now then on what do we mean by embracing the tension. Because this is where the tension will come face to face, or this is where we will have to face the tension. Do we express compassion towards someone we disagree with? Do we show compassion when we know that the agenda of the party is opposed to us? Do we show compassion when we see someone who has a need but they do not believe what we believe? How do I express the love of Jesus or shine the light of Jesus into hostile places? And like I said, this is often much easier for us to do overseas in the mission field than for us to do in our own communities. How do we show compassion to those who we feel threatened, who are threatening our beliefs as Christians? The church has to deal with this. We have to wrestle with this. We have people in our communities, in our society, who are opposed to Christianity, but they need Jesus. And they have needs. So how do we, as a church, love those people? Now, if we were on the mission field, we would be like, well, that's what you were sent there to do as missionaries. Go find people who are far from Jesus, no matter how messy, no matter how complicated. We would say to those missionaries, that's what your job is. Go reach those people. And I would say to us as a church, that's what our job is. To go into our community and to reach those people with the love of Jesus. For some reason, when it's in our own communities, it's much more complicated and difficult. This is the tension that we will have to wrestle with. So are you ready to look at 4 unhealthy ways of dealing with the tension? And then I want to give you what I believe is the right way to deal with the tension. So the first one is, the most common one, is that we react to the tension with separation. We separate ourselves. We will have nothing to do with them and with their way of life, and we protect ourselves and protect ourselves and protect ourselves, and if we don't agree with them, then we will do nothing with them. Now, I want to give cautions here. I'm not saying that you indulge and you do, I don't think I even need to say those things, but just so you know. But one of the things that I've seen so often is like, well, those people, they believe that. Those people, yeah, I heard that they do this, and yeah, I heard that they are this, and so done, separate, we're gone. Again, as Christians, if we were on the mission field, the mission team would call us home and say, what are you doing? Oh, guess what? We went here to Papua New Guinea. There's people here that don't believe in Jesus. And so we stayed home the whole time. The mission team would be like, come on home. We sent the wrong missionaries. Are you following what I'm saying? How about here at home? How about in our communities? I think Jesus sometimes is saying, go into Jerusalem, Judea. Go into Sublet and teach and preach and proclaim and baptize. Even, he doesn't give any when and who and what. He just says go. Go into your community. No matter the tensions you may experience, go into those communities and reach people who are far from Jesus with the gospel of Jesus. But the temptation thing for us so often is to just separate ourselves. We'll come to church, we'll guard ourselves, and I'm not saying you're doing this. I'm just saying this is often the norm. We will separate ourselves and protect ourselves, and hopefully they come in here one day, and if they do, then they'll hear about Jesus, but we're not going out there. And yet Jesus says, go. The tension is one that we have to wrestle with. The other one that's very common is reaction with hostility. We'll show them. We'll push back. We'll focus on, more on the issue than on the person. It's about winning the debate. It's about proving them wrong. I remember a number of years ago, I was at someone's house in our church, and this is many years ago, and this was right after 9/11. And so we were talking about, because at that time, honestly, I think a lot of us, at least Canadians, we really didn't understand the complexity of all that took place. And so we were having a conversation about terrorism. And one individual became very animated and made a very strong view and had no problem expressing their view on everyone else. And knowing that this person was a Christian and knowing that they were a leader in our church, I was a little surprised at some of the things that they said, And, here we are in their house, and so I want to be respectful, but I'm, the associate pastor at that time. And one individual became so animated and started talking about the problems and expressing themselves. And like I said, knowing that they were Christians, I really didn't know what to do, and knowing that if these individuals, would die, that they would end up in hell. And so I asked this individual, I said, I just want to, what do you do with this tension? What do you do with the fact that these people need to know Jesus? Every terrorist needs to come to know Jesus. And what do you do with this? And I'm not making any statements here. We're just having a conversation. And he got really animated and started accusing me of, selling out. And I'm like, whoa, why is this about me now suddenly? I'm just asking you, if you knew that you as a Christian are going to heaven the minute you die, would you not want to see this person come to know Jesus? And he said, without skipping a beat, I would have no problem sending every bleeping terrorist to hell. And as a Christian, as a pastor, I was shocked. There was no compassion. Now, I know it's a complicated topic, and I'm not dumbing it down. But I hope what you heard is the same thing I heard. This man's heart was so far removed from the compassion that Jesus showed you and I. And so one of the things that we often do when there's tension is we just respond with hostility. And again, I'm not downplaying the complexity of some of these issues that we are faced with. I recognize the church needs to take a stand. I recognize that we need to pass laws. I recognize all of those things. But guess what? We are called to wrestle with the tension that we experience. And if the only way we're going to wrestle with it, the only response we're going to have is just hostility, I'm not sure that is always going to be the most healthy thing, because that wasn't the response that Jesus had when he looked at our sin. His response is still very fresh in my mind. And this man's response, his anger was so evident. Now I recognize this is a bit of an extreme case, but I want you to think about, do you respond only with either separation or hostility? Then there's another one. And this is maybe the extreme opposite of hostility, is we respond with compromise. We just give in. We just try to smooth everything over. We don't want to deal with the tension, and so we just compromise, and we do really nothing, and we just make it sound like, we kind of all believe the same thing, and instead of standing up for what we believe, we prefer to just keep the peace. I don't really want to talk about those kind of things, and maybe at home you get upset about it, but whatever. But, when you're faced with it, you just compromise, and eventually you're left looking at these two people and going, I don't know who the Christian is and who the non-Christian is. Because they've compromised so much that, do you even stand for any of the things that Scripture teaches? And then the last one, this common way of responding to tension, is apathy. Apathy simply means I don't care that I don't care. And these are people who just, who cares? Man, church was good, the pastor spoke, the band sang. Oh, do we have to talk about this? Why are we even here on a Sunday afternoon? Can we just, I'll serve in the kitchen, I'll serve as an usher, people got problems and they'll deal with it. Can we just not bother right now? If we, one lady literally said one time, if we wouldn't invite all these people into our church, we wouldn't have all these problems. And those things break my heart. I hope by now you have got a sense from me that I believe the Christian life is all about getting into the messiness of people's lives that are broken. I've been accused, my wife and I, we've been accused many times in Leamington of selling out. Just about a month ago, I was invited to our local high school, and they were having an assembly, and it was the first time ever that they had this kind of assembly, and so I won't share the details because it's kind of confidential, but there was an attempt to have an assembly about the Muslims and the Switzerland massacre, and so when I was invited to come and kind of talk to them about, the response and stuff like that. And I just said to the people who were inviting me, I said, it's not fair that we only focus on that one group of people. Muslims are not the only ones being persecuted. Muslims are not the only ones who are being, there are Christians by the thousands and the millions who are also experiencing persecution. And so they took it back to the students who were planning this thing, and they wrestled with it, and the students did some research, and they were shocked to find how many Christians were also being persecuted for their faith, because the media just doesn't really cover that stuff. And so they invited me to come in then as the pastor to talk about, from a Christian perspective on persecution. And then they invited an imam to come in from Windsor, and a Muslim, and he came in and he spoke from a Muslim perspective. And so I shared that with some of the people in our church, and they were like, well, how do you feel about that, Ike? Sharing the stage. And I said, all I see is that for the first time in all my years of being a pastor, I'm invited into our local high school, and I'm allowed to share the gospel of Jesus to an entire student body. But it's the tension. And maybe this is one of those things, and I'm not sure, maybe some of you are getting uncomfortable now, but these are the environments I feel most comfortable. I love being in those environments because it gives me a sense of what's happening in our world. And what I see so often is that there are people who don't have a relationship with Jesus, and they don't even understand that they need him. Because the church has so often done one of these four things. And so often the thing that the church has done is we just separated ourselves, and we just said, we want nothing to do with you, and you want nothing to do with us, and so fine. And all of a sudden we start working on some of the same projects, and we begin to have a respect. You may not believe what I believe spiritually, but man, we both care about people, and so suddenly there's a relationship that we can have. But often what I'm finding is people are saying, like, I don't like Christians. Maria had someone tell her one time, all Christians are this, this, and this. And it was not nice words. And she's like, okay, well, not you guys. Not you guys. Oh, churches suck. Churches are all fake. Okay, not your church. And the only reason they said those things is because Maria and I are engaged in those. We're not trying to puff ourselves up here, but I want you to understand there is a community out there that has an impression of the church sometimes. And sorry, I'm off track here a little bit. You'll clean up the mess later, right? There's a community out there sometimes that has an impression of the church, and the reason they have the impression of the church is because we haven't engaged them in a healthy way. So in our community, suddenly Deer Run Church is talked about very favorably because we're making a difference in our community. We're changing, we're helping people, and we are seeing tremendous growth into our church. So then what is the healthy way? What's the right way then to respond to the tension? So I want to suggest to you today that the way to respond to the tension is with compassion. Now listen very carefully to what I want to tell you next. Compassion does not mean compromise. Compassion does not mean giving in. Compassion does not allow for hostility. Compassion does not work if we don't care. And compassion does not remove all of the tension. But there is something about going into the tension with compassion. What Jesus saw the entire time he was in that moment was the need of this woman's sin to be forgiven. And I think for us as a church sometimes, when we think about the LGBTQ community, for example, and we think about, different groups of this and different groups of this, and one of the things I hope that we recognize is these people need Jesus. That is the start for every single one of us to be rid of the things that are going on. If you have sin in your life, if you don't have Jesus in your life, you can change behavior all you want, but really what you need for eternity is a relationship with Jesus. Compassion goes to the heart of what does this person truly, truly need. They need Jesus. They need love. Compassion brings us in close. Years ago, and again, I'm going to step on some things here, and you'll clean it all up later, okay? I'm gone in a couple hours, so you'll clean it all up. Years ago, our church really had to wrestle with divorce and remarriage. And I to this day, struggle with how much we hurt some families and couples and some widows, especially who are divorced. We had no compassion for them. And I remember we were at a meeting, and somebody literally said, "I don't care. I don't care." And this person, all they saw was the topic. They didn't know the situation. They didn't know the horrible, horrible things that had happened in this relationship. They didn't know about any of those things. All they saw was the topic, and they're like, "I don't care." And they just wanted to be rid of it. But what compassion does, compassion brings you in really close. Suddenly, you're no longer just looking at the issue. You are looking at the person dealing with the issue. And I'm telling you, as someone who has sat with people who struggle through some things that I don't even know how to give advice to, suddenly you're sitting there with them and you feel their pain. They're wrestling with, why is this happening to me? How did I get into this mess? Will I ever be free of this? And because you exercise compassion, you're in those people's lives, and you're not saying the issue is no big deal. We need to deal with that. We need to process that. But I never want to lose sight of the person. I don't want to see just the issue. So compassion brings you in close. Suddenly you're in your local high school and you're seeing kids who are cutting themselves. You're seeing kids who are sleeping around, who are doing all these kind of things, not because they're bad kids, but because they have no parents at home, they have no love. They will do anything to feel some sense of peace. Sleeping around, suddenly I feel at least somewhat connected. And because you don't just see the issue, you see the person, all of a sudden you're going, what you need is love. What you need is someone to hold you. What you need someone is to just understand the depth of your pain, not just the filthy thing you did. Preaching my heart here, because this is where I believe the gospel really works. So compassion, church. If you want to serve, you want to make a difference, you will have to process the tension. There's going to be tension. If you are serving and it's always easy, dig deeper. Dig deeper, because there's tension and it's beautiful. And as someone who has lived in this tension for years, and my wife and I, we've lived in this tension for years and years and years with people, I'm telling you, it is exhausting. It is tiring. But at the same time, to see someone come out of something like that, it is so absolutely refreshing and rewarding. One quick story. Years and years ago, a young lady came to our house, and we were already kind of going to bed, and we heard a knock on the door, and she came in, she's crying, and I'm like, what's going on? And she's like, I was just raped. We loved this girl. So we called her parents. I will never forget the dad's response. So the dad came over and the mom came over. And so we're there with them in this messiness, this pain. We're trying to understand what to do, and he only saw the issue, and he literally said this, I don't know whether to hug you or spank you. And I'm like, this is your daughter. Where's the compassion? Where's the love? He's like, I told her not to wear that. These are extreme stories. And I'm not doing them just to like, oh, wow. But I'm telling you, church, we live in a world that has done things that aren't healthy and aren't good. We have Jesus. We are the hope of the world. Jesus Christ living in us. We are the light of the world. Oh my goodness, we are the ones who can go into these awful situations, these difficult situations, and not fear that we're going to become like them, because we have the power of the Holy Spirit living in us. And if we show the compassion of Jesus, I believe that with Jesus comes change. And that when we share Jesus in a compassionate way that people are drawn to him, I truly believe that people will surrender their lives, be free from their sin, and their lifestyle will follow. So compassion brings us in close. Compassion gives us eyes to see things that we may not see otherwise. Compassion brings hope and healing. Compassion is willing to get messy. So I want to challenge you today. And I know the things I've shared have been tense. I want to challenge you today. Would you consider embracing the tension with compassion? All of us have experienced the love and the compassion of Jesus. Think about the messiness of your life. The Son of God, seated on the throne of God, says, I'll go down into that mess that I created, that they screwed up. I will be born as a baby, as an infant, dependent on an earthly mother for nutrition and life. And I will be raised to become a man. And then I will allow those very people I created and breathed life into to nail me to a tree so that they can have freedom from their sins. That's compassion. That's the love of Jesus. And I hope you hear my heart that God is calling you and I to consider that we would do this, make the same kind of a sacrifice, willing to sacrifice like that in order to save the people in our lives. So would you consider embracing the compassion, the tension with compassion? I hope I haven't said too much. How you feeling? Serious? How you feeling? Anyone else? You doing okay? This is the same response I got from my congregation. And I'm not saying that you haven't heard this before, but I do know and I do recognize someone who came in and leaves. It can be a little hard to understand exactly what's being said. I want you to understand me. I believe in the Bible. I believe in standards. I believe in boundaries. I believe in all those things. But let's not see legalism over the person. Let's not see rules as more important than the people. And I remember when I talked to our congregation about this, there were some people that kind of lined up and said, man, what did you mean with that? What does this mean for the person at my workplace that cusses all the time? What do you mean? What does this mean for my neighbor? What does this mean for this person in my high school? What do I do with this? And we began to pray with different people in our church and life groups and individuals like that. We began to really just challenge people to pray. Would you wake up in me this compassion? Would you just wake it in me? Give me a compassion for those who don't know you, Jesus, and who don't know Jesus. So here's what I want to invite you to do. Just quietly, don't need any music. Would you ask Jesus to awaken in you a compassion for those who are far from Jesus? I don't care what their lifestyle is like. I don't care what their beliefs are. I don't care. What I'm focused on is the audience that's in front of me, because all these people here, the difference that we could make, the impact that we can have by expressing the love and the compassion of Jesus to the people that you are going to be at work with tomorrow, the people that you're going to be in the community with tomorrow, they need this. I guarantee you right now, you are thinking of someone who needs the love and the compassion of Jesus. So right where you are, if you wouldn't mind, just bow your heads. Jesus, we come, and I just entrust that these words have landed in a healthy way. And God, I pray for the individuals who are maybe wrestling with, what does this mean? Did he mean this? Did he mean that? God, I just pray for a moment we could just quiet those thoughts down for a moment. I pray that if at this moment we would just focus on ourselves. And we would just ask ourselves right now, Lord, do I have the compassion that you have for me? Have I become hardened? Am I a person who just compromises? Am I a person who just shows apathy? Am I just hostile? Do I just run away? So if we've noticed maybe in our own hearts that we don't have the compassion that we should have, Lord, I pray that you would awaken it in us. At this very moment, Holy Spirit, that you would stir. And I think, God, the real way that that's going to happen is for us to understand how much you love us. So would you at this moment, just you and God, would you just invite him to awaken in you this compassion? If you feel that your heart has maybe become callous towards non-Christians, would you just invite Jesus to break your heart for those who do not have a relationship with Jesus? If you feel maybe in your own life that you've built walls and barriers, and anyone that thinks differently than you or is different than you, you've just kind of said, I want nothing to do with them. Would you invite Jesus to come and just take down some of those barriers and allow you to see those people the way that Jesus sees them? Father, I thank you for this church. Thank you for these people. God, I pray your blessing on this congregation. I pray for their leadership. Pray for the pastor. I pray that you would accomplish in this church what you want to accomplish. And then, Father, I pray that you would accomplish through this church what you want to accomplish. I thank you for the opportunities that they have, whether it's through work or whether it's through sports or whatever it may be, social life, whatever way it may be. God, I thank you for the opportunities that they have to go into this community and to share the love of Jesus. I pray, God, that their love would fall on fertile soil and that many would come to know you, Jesus, because of the love and the compassion that is expressed from this congregation. I pray, Lord, that when there is opportunity for words, that you would give them the words to say so that people would understand the message and the truth to which we hold. I pray these things in the name of Jesus. Amen.